The Duke of Blackwood required a wife. This was not a matter of romance, but of logistics. It was a line item on a long list of ducal responsibilities, nestled between the draining of the fenlands at his northern estate and the acquisition of a new stallion for his stables. He had, with the same dispassionate logic he applied to crop rotation, assessed the available prospects of the season and found them wanting. They were too loud, too ambitious, too beautiful, or too clever. They were, in short, too much. He required a duchess who would be a placid and elegant fixture, a woman who would manage his homes with quiet competence and produce an heir with minimal fuss. He needed a blank canvas upon which the title of Duchess of Blackwood could be painted, obscuring whatever trivial personality lay beneath, and so his attention had settled, with a sense of grim satisfaction, upon Miss Elara Vance. She was a ghost at the edge of the ballroom, a whisper in a world that roared. She was 26, past the first blush of debutante hysteria, and possessed a stillness that society mistook for dullness. She was neither plain enough to be an object of pity, nor beautiful enough to be a threat. She was simply there, present, but not accounted for. Alistair had observed her on 3 separate occasions. Once, she had spent an entire evening patiently untangling her aunt's knitting wool while the older woman held court. Another time, she had organized the seating arrangement for a chaotic dinner party with the subtle efficiency of a field marshal, a feat no one else had noticed. The third time, he had asked her a direct question about a recent trade bill, expecting a stammered platitude. Instead, she had offered a 3-sentence summary so concise and accurate it could have been printed in The Times. Then she had fallen silent, as if startled by her own voice. Perfect. She was competent but not ambitious, intelligent but not challenging. She was, he concluded, the precise solution to his matrimonial problem. He made his proposal in her aunt's cluttered morning room, a space overflowing with porcelain pug dogs and wilting floral arrangements. Elara sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She did not blush or flutter her fan. She simply listened as he laid out his terms. It was a contract. He offered her a title, immense wealth, and security beyond the wildest dreams of a poor relation. He would be a courteous and respectful husband. He would not be an intrusive one. He would require her to manage his households, host a dozen or so significant events a year, and, in due course, provide an heir and a spare. Her life as the perpetual, overlooked companion to a demanding aunt would be over. In exchange, he required her quiet, her compliance, her invisibility. He was, in essence, offering to purchase her silence with a coronet. When he had finished, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a carriage clock on the mantelpiece. Elara looked at him, her gray eyes clear and analytical. She was not looking at a suitor. She was examining a business proposition. "Your Grace," she said, her voice low and even, "you have been very clear. I appreciate your candor. There was no girlish delight, no feigned modesty. There was only a calm, unnerving acceptance of the transactional nature of the moment. And your answer, Miss Vance?" he pressed, a flicker of impatience stirring within him. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "The terms are acceptable. Your Grace, I will be the Duchess you require." Alistair felt a wave of relief so profound it almost surprised him. The problem was solved. The line item could be struck through. He had secured his Duchess. A quiet Duchess. A manageable Duchess. A Duchess who would not cause him a moment's trouble. He stood, offered a stiff bow, and departed. He did not notice the way her hands, still folded in her lap, were clenched so tightly the knuckles were white. He did not see the flicker of something resignation, perhaps, or a deep, weary sorrow that passed through her eyes before being extinguished. He saw only a plain, sensible woman who had just made a very sensible bargain. He had seen what he had wanted to see, and nothing more. The first dinner after their formal engagement was a test, though only Alistair knew it. He had invited his solicitor, Mr. Davies, a man as dry and precise as a legal document, and his own sister, Lady Beatrice, a woman whose primary conversational topics were her own ailments and the failings of others. It was an intentionally dull gathering, designed to observe his fiancée in her natural, quiet state. Ilara was dressed in a simple gown of dove gray, the color of a winter sky. She sat with perfect posture, a polite and attentive listener, as Beatrice detailed a tedious affliction of the nerves, and Mr. Davies expounded upon the legal complexities of entailment. She was a perfect portrait of ducal propriety. She did not interrupt. She did not offer unsolicited opinions. She smiled faintly at the appropriate moments and murmured sympathetic noises when Beatrice paused for breath. Alistair felt a grim sense of vindication. He had chosen well. She was exactly as advertised. "The problem, of course, Mr. Davies was saying, peering over his spectacles, is the codicil concerning the Welsh properties. The language is archaic, almost indecipherable. It refers to a precedent set in the court of Henry VII, but the records are lost." "Dreadful," Beatrice murmured, already losing interest. "Speaking of lost things, I have misplaced my favorite shawl." Alistair was about to steer the conversation back to his sister when Ilara spoke. Her voice was soft, yet it cut through the room's ambient dullness with the clarity of a bell. "The precedent is not lost, Mr. Davies," she said. "It is likely referring to the Vaughan case of 1492. The records are not with the standard court archives. They are held with the private papers of the Earls of Powys due to a familial connection. The language is not archaic so much as a regional dialect of Welsh law that was poorly translated into Latin." The room fell silent. Mr. Davies stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. Beatrice paused in her search for her imaginary shawl. Alistair looked at his future wife. She had delivered this small, startling lecture without a change in expression, her gaze fixed on the salt cellar to the left of her plate. Having spoken, she now seemed to retreat back into herself, as if the effort had been too great. "Indeed, Mr. Davies finally managed, clearing his throat. "Indeed. That is remarkably insightful, Miss Vance. I will have my clerk make inquiries at once." Alistair said nothing. He watched her. A crack had appeared in the smooth, placid surface he had so admired. It was a tiny fracture, but it was there. He had assumed the well of her knowledge was shallow. She had just revealed a surprising, hidden depth. For a brief, unsettling moment, he felt a flicker of something other than detached satisfaction. It felt like curiosity. He dismissed it. A fluke. Her father had been a country scholar. She must have picked up some legal trivia from him. A party trick. It meant nothing. He recalibrated his assessment only slightly. Competent, intelligent, and occasionally, surprisingly, informed. Still manageable. Still quiet. The fundamental assessment remained unchanged. The problem remained solved. 2 weeks before the wedding, Alistair sat in his study, a vast and somber room paneled in dark wood, and attended to the final piece of business. The marriage settlements were drawn up, but he needed to send a final letter of instruction to Mr. Davies, along with a more personal note to his oldest friend, Viscount Satterfield, who was abroad and would miss the ceremony. He wrote to Satterfield with the casual arrogance of a man speaking to his equal, a man who did not need to guard his words. He described the match in the same transactional terms he had used in his own mind. "The deed is done," he wrote. "I am to be married in a fortnight. You will not know the lady, a Miss Ilara Vance. She is the niece of Lady Danbury, though possesses none of her aunt's tiresome vivacity. She is perfectly suitable, pliant, quiet, and possessed of no strong opinions. She will bore the French ambassador, I am sure, but she will not burn down the West Wing. A fair trade, I think. The line is secured, and my peace along with it." He folded the letter, sealed it, and then wrote the more formal instructions for his solicitor. He was called away by his estate manager for an urgent matter regarding a tenant dispute, and he left the 2 letters lying plainly on the blotter of his desk. He did not give them a second thought. They were merely correspondence, the ink and paper residue of a decision already made. He had suggested to Ilara that she might wish to begin familiarizing herself with the household. He had meant for her to consult with the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. He had not expected her to take the directive so literally. Ilara, finding herself with a rare afternoon of freedom from her aunt, had decided to visit Blackwood House. Mrs. Gable, a woman of formidable presence and surprising kindness, had given her a tour. When they reached the Duke's study, the housekeeper had hesitated. "His Grace prefers his study to be left untouched," she said, "but he did say you were to be made familiar with the house." "I will not disturb anything," Ilara had replied. "I am merely trying to understand the geography of my new life." She stepped inside alone. The room smelled of leather, old paper, and beeswax. It was the heart of the Duke's power, a place of cold logic and hard decisions. Her eyes were drawn to the massive desk, to the two letters lying there. One was addressed to Viscount Satterfield, the other to Mr. H. Davies, solicitor. She did not mean to read it. It was not in her nature to pry. But as she stood there, a strange compulsion took hold of her. She was about to sign her entire life over to the man who occupied this room. She was to become a part of his world, a fixture in his house. Yet she knew nothing of him, save for the cold, hard facts of the contract he had offered. Her fingers, light and trembling, reached out and lifted the letter addressed to the Viscount. It was not sealed. In his haste, he had only folded it. She read it once. Then she read it again, pliant, quiet, and possessed of no strong opinions. "She will bore the French ambassador, I am sure. A fair trade." The words did not strike her with the force of a blow. They landed with the silent, chilling precision of a shard of ice lodging itself near her heart. There was no shock of betrayal, only the cold, grim confirmation of what she had already known. She had not been chosen. She had been acquired. She was not a bride. She was a piece of household furniture, selected for its lack of distinguishing features. There was no sound in the room, no gasp, no sob. The world outside the tall windows continued its placid afternoon rhythm. Ilara's face remained a mask of calm neutrality. But inside, something shifted. A door that had been held tentatively ajar, a door holding some small, foolish hope for partnership or respect, swung shut with a quiet, final click. It was not a door of anger, but of acceptance. The terms of the contract were even clearer now. He had not purchased her silence. He had purchased her performance of silence. And she, Ilara Vance, was a consummate performer. With hands that were now perfectly steady, she refolded the letter. She did not fold it loosely. She aligned the edges with meticulous precision, pressing the creases flat with her thumbnail until they were as sharp and definite as the edge of a knife. She placed it back on the blotter, exactly where she had found it. She turned and walked out of the study, closing the door softly behind her. Mrs. Gable, waiting in the hall, saw her emerge. The housekeeper, a woman who had seen 3 generations of dukes come and go, was an astute observer of human nature. She noticed a subtle change in the young woman's bearing. Miss Vance had entered the study with the hesitant posture of a guest. She exited it with the implacable resolve of a queen in exile. The wedding was a grand and bloodless affair, a masterpiece of social theater. Alistair stood at the altar, feeling the distant satisfaction of a general whose campaign was drawing to a successful close. Ilara, a vision in cream silk, floated down the aisle, her face serene and unreadable. She spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice. She was the perfect image of a duchess. Their new life at Blackwood Manor, the Duke's primary country seat, began. Alistair, satisfied that the domestic front was secure, immersed himself in his own affairs. He had estates to run, political correspondence to answer, a world to manage. He expected his new wife to settle into the background, a quiet and graceful presence at the edges of his life. And at first, she did. She met with Mrs. Gable, reviewed the menus, and approved the guest lists for the upcoming autumn gatherings. She was polite, efficient, and utterly faultless. She was everything he had wanted, but a strange disquiet began to creep into the corners of Alistair's awareness. It started with the music. In the first week of their marriage, Alara had sometimes played the pianoforte in the drawing room after dinner. She played with a delicate, understated skill, filling the vast, silent evenings with the soft melancholy of Chopin. Alistair had found it pleasant, a soothing, unobtrusive soundtrack to his reading. Then, one evening, the music stopped. The pianoforte remained closed. The drawing room after dinner was once again cavernous and silent, the quiet broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rustle of his newspaper. He found the silence unnerving. He had grown accustomed to the music, he realized. He missed it. "Does the pianoforte require tuning, Your Grace?" he asked her one night, trying to sound casual. She looked up from her embroidery, her expression placid. "No, Alistair. It is in perfect condition." End quote. She offered no other explanation. The lid of the instrument remained shut. Then he began to notice her absence. At first, it was small things. He would come down to breakfast to find her place already cleared. Mrs. Gable would inform him that the Duchess had taken a tray in her study an hour earlier. Her study. He hadn't even realized she had claimed a room as her own. She had taken over the small, neglected book room overlooking the East Terrace, a space he had not entered in years. At dinner, their conversations became models of sterile courtesy. He would ask about her day. She would provide a concise summary of her household activities. There were no more surprising insights into Welsh law. There were no more flashes of unexpected wit. She answered his questions precisely and then fell silent, her gaze distant, her presence as decorative and as mute as the silver epergne in the center of the table. She was present and she was absent. She was there and she was not there. He felt it as a palpable void. The house was enormous, but with her living in it, it had begun to feel inhabited. Now, it was reverting to its former state, a magnificent, empty shell. Her silence was no longer the placid quiet he had purchased. It was a dense, weighted thing. It was an articulate silence. One afternoon, he sought her out, a vague sense of irritation driving him. He found her in her new study. The room had been transformed. The dusty, forgotten books had been cleaned and catalogued. The faded curtains had been replaced. And on a large table in the center of the room, she had unrolled architectural plans of the estate. Beside them were the household account ledgers, open and filled with her neat, precise script. She was not embroidering. She was not arranging flowers. She was working. He looked at the ledgers. She had reorganized the entire accounting system. Her marginalia were sharp and insightful, questioning a supplier's inflated prices here, suggesting a more efficient allocation of funds for the stables there. It was the work of a keen, analytical mind, a mind he had deliberately chosen to ignore. "You seem busy," he said, the words sounding inadequate in the focused silence of the room. "I am fulfilling my duties, Your Grace," she replied, not looking up. "Managing your households, as per our agreement." Her use of Your Grace was a small, cold flick of a whip. In the first week, she had called him Alistair. Now, she had retreated behind the wall of his title. He stood there, feeling like an intruder in his own home. He was the Duke of Blackwood. He was master of all he surveyed, yet in this room, he felt superfluous. She had created a world for herself within his, a world where she was competent and in control, a world that did not require him at all. He retreated, a profound sense of confusion settling over him. He had gotten exactly what he had bargained for. A quiet, efficient Duchess who caused no trouble. So why did he feel this constant, gnawing sense of loss? Why did the perfect fulfillment of his contract feel so much like a failure? The catalyst arrived in the form of the French ambassador. Monsieur Delacroix was a man of formidable intellect and rapier wit, a diplomat who used conversation as both a weapon and an art form. Alistair had dreaded the man's obligatory visit, remembering the line in his letter to Satterfield with a grimace. He had resigned himself to an evening of carrying the entire conversational burden, of shielding the notoriously sharp-tongued ambassador from his wife's placid dullness. The evening began as he expected. Ilara was a vision of ducal perfection in dark blue velvet. She was serene, beautiful, and utterly silent. She smiled graciously, nodded at the ambassador's pleasantries, and contributed nothing. Alistair worked hard, steering the conversation through the treacherous waters of European politics, feeling the strain of the one-man performance. He was called away for a moment by a footman with an urgent message from London. He left the drawing room with an apology, expecting to return to a tableau of awkward silence. He was gone for no more than 10 minutes. When he stepped back to the doorway, he stopped, frozen by the scene before him. Ilara and Monsieur Delacroix were seated near the fire. She was no longer a silent statue. She was leaning forward, her face animated, her eyes sparkling with intelligence. And she was speaking. She was speaking in fluent, rapid-fire French, her accent purer than Alistair's own. But to argue that Rousseau's concept of the general will can be divorced from its potential for tyranny is to ignore the lessons of the terror, she was saying, her tone light, but her argument incisive. It is a beautiful idea on paper, but in practice, it is a loaded pistol in the hands of the state. Delacroix laughed, a sound of genuine delight. Ah, but your grace, you argue like a true cynic. Is there no room for idealism in governance? Must we always assume the worst of our own creations? I am not a cynic, monsieur, she countered, a small, witty smile playing on her lips. I am a student of history, and history is a very persuasive teacher. Alistair stood in the shadows of the doorway, utterly stunned. This was not the woman he had married. This was not the woman he had dismissed as a bore. This woman was brilliant. She was incisive. She was, in a word, he had never once associated with her, captivating. He had seen her summarize a trade bill. He had heard her correct his solicitor on a point of ancient law. He had dismissed these as aberrations. But this was not an aberration. This was a sustained, effortless display of intellectual firepower. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He had not just misjudged her. He had been profoundly, foundationally, catastrophically wrong. He retreated from the doorway before they could see him, his heart pounding. He went to his study, the ambassador and his brilliant wife forgotten. He paced the room like a caged animal, the pieces of the last few months clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Anaphora began its damning rhythm in his mind. He thought about the silent pianoforte, an instrument that had once filled the house with music. He thought about her empty chair at the breakfast table, a small daily statement of her separateness. He thought about the cool, formal title of Your Grace falling from her lips. He thought about the meticulously organized ledgers in her study, a testament to a mind he had deemed to have no strong opinions. He thought about her flawless, witty French, a language he had assumed she barely possessed. He thought about all of it. 100 small, disconnected clues that now formed a single damning picture of his own colossal arrogance. He had been living with a stranger, a brilliant, capable, fascinating stranger whom he had willfully rendered invisible. His frantic gaze swept the room and landed on the rosewood letterbox on his desk. A memory, cold and sharp, surfaced. A memory of 2 letters left lying on the blotter, one to his solicitor, one to Satterfield. A dreadful certainty seized him. He strode to the desk and fumbled with the key to the box. He found the letter to Satterfield, which he had never sent, having decided it was too flippant. He pulled it out. He stared at the folds. The paper was crisp, the creases unnaturally sharp. They were not the soft, slightly clumsy folds of a man sealing a letter in haste. They were the precise, deliberate creases of someone refolding a document with meticulous care. Someone who wanted it to look untouched, but whose very precision was a giveaway. Someone, he knew with a sickening lurch in his gut, like Ilara. She had read it. She had read his smug, dismissive, insulting assessment of her, and she had not confronted him. She had not wept or raged. She had done something far more devastating. She had simply agreed with him. She had become the Duchess he had described, pliant, quiet, a beautiful, functional object. She had fulfilled her side of the bargain with a terrifying, literal precision that was, in itself, a profound and ongoing rebuke. Her silence was not submission. It was judgment. Her efficiency was not a service. It was a weapon. The full scale of his folly crashed down upon him. He had not just made an error in judgment. He had committed an act of profound spiritual vandalism. He had taken a vibrant, intelligent woman and tried to wallpaper her over with his own dull expectations. He had looked at a diamond and seen only a useful piece of glass. He sank into his chair, the letter clenched in his fist. The words he had written seemed to mock him from the page. She will bore the French ambassador, I am sure. And in the drawing room, the sound of delighted laughter, the ambassador's and his wife's, drifted down the hall, a testament to the depth of his blindness. He was the Duke of Blackwood, a man of power and intellect, and he had never felt like a greater fool. He did not know how long he sat there, the damning letter in his hand. An hour, 2. The house grew quiet as the ambassador departed and the servants retired for the night. The silence that settled was the one he had once craved, the one he had bargained for. Now, it was unbearable. It was the sound of his own failure. He had to find her. He had to speak to her. What he would say, he did not know. An apology felt like a paltry, inadequate tool for a wound so deep, but the silence could not continue. He could not spend the rest of his life married to a ghost of his own making. He pushed himself up from his chair and went in search of her. He did not go to her bedchamber. He knew, instinctively, she would not be there. He went to the place she had claimed as her own, the place where she was most herself. He went to the library she had created. The door was slightly ajar. A single lamp cast a warm pool of light in the darkness. He found her there, curled in a large wingback chair by the cold fireplace, a book lying open in her lap. She was not reading. She was staring into the empty hearth, her expression distant and weary. She looked small and terribly alone in the vast, dark room. She heard him enter and looked up. Her face did not change, but a subtle tension entered her posture. She was bracing herself. He walked slowly into the center of the room, stopping several feet away from her. He felt like a petitioner in a foreign court. He held up the letter. "You read this," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. She did not deny it. Her gaze dropped to the letter in his hand, then returned to his face. "Yes," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. The simple, unadorned admission was more damning than any accusation. He had rehearsed a dozen speeches on the way here. Apologies, explanations, justifications. They all crumbled to dust in the face of her profound, quiet stillness. There was only one thing to say. "I was wrong," he said. The words felt raw and insufficient in his own ears, but they were the only truth he had left. "I was wrong. About everything. About you." He took a step closer. "I wrote that letter out of arrogance. Out of a kind of blindness I can't even begin to explain. I saw you as a solution to a problem. A duchess. A title. I didn't see the person at all." He looked around the room she had built, at the neat rows of catalogued books, the evidence of her mind, her industry. "I thought I was acquiring a quiet companion. I didn't realize I was marrying a scholar, a strategist, and a musician. I heard your intelligence, and I dismissed it as a party trick. I saw your competence, and I mistook it for compliance." He finally met her eyes, pleading for her to see the sincerity that was clawing its way through his lifetime of ducal reserve. "The woman who spoke with Delacroix tonight. The woman who reorganized this entire estate's finances. The woman who can translate archaic Welsh law. That is, the woman who is my wife. And I have been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool." He stopped, his confession hanging in the silent air between them. He was not asking for forgiveness. He did not deserve it. He was simply laying down his arms, admitting the totality of his defeat. Elara watched him, her expression still unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Then she spoke. "Your apology is noted, Your Grace," she said, and the formal title was like a slap. "However, your perception was the foundation of our contract. You have just admitted that your perception was flawed. The terms of our agreement are, therefore, null and void." "Ah, yes." He stared at her, his heart sinking. "Ilara, we have a new arrangement to make, Alistair," she continued, and the switch to his given name was more commanding than the title had been. "If we are to continue this partnership," she did not demand jewels or a groveling apology. She did not threaten to leave. She did something far more radical. She began to renegotiate the terms of their life together, not as a supplicant, but as an equal. "From now on," she said, her voice gaining a strength he had never heard before, "I will not be a silent fixture. I will host salons. Not the tedious affairs your sister prefers, but gatherings of artists, politicians, and thinkers. I will invite whom I choose." She gestured to the ledgers he had seen earlier. "I will not simply manage your households. I will co-administer your estates. I will have a full and equal say in all financial and strategic decisions. You will consult me not as a courtesy, but as a partner." She finally stood, her small frame seeming to possess an unshakable strength. "And you, Alistair, will learn to see me. You will learn to listen. You will not get my compliance. You will get my counsel. You will not get my silence. You will get my opinion. Those are my terms." She stood before him, not a duchess, not a wife, but a sovereign power setting the articles of a treaty. He had expected tears or anger. He had not expected this cool, brilliant assertion of her own worth. It was more breathtaking than her conversation with the ambassador. He did not hesitate. "I agree," he said, his voice hoarse. "To all of it. They are better terms than I deserve." A week later, Lord Ashworth, a man who fancied himself Alistair's rival in all things, cornered him at their club. Ashworth had heard of the Duke's hasty marriage and was keen to mock it. "Heard you finally shackled yourself, Blackwood," he said with a sneer, loud enough for others to hear. "To some little brown mouse, wasn't it? Must be dreadfully dull, being chained to a bookkeeper." The Alistair note of a month ago would have ignored the comment, or returned it with a cool, dismissive barb. The new Alistair did not. He turned slowly to face Ashworth. His expression was glacial. "Ashworth," he said, his voice low but carrying across the room, "my wife's intellect could buy and sell your entire worthless estate before you finished your morning coffee. Her name will not be spoken by you again. Not in my presence. Not in this club. Not anywhere. Is that understood?" The public humiliation was absolute. Ashworth paled, stammered an apology, and fled. Alistair had not just defended her honor. He had publicly declared his allegiance. He had chosen his side. When the story reached Ilara, as he knew it would, she said nothing. But that evening, for the first time in months, as he sat reading in the drawing room, he heard a sound that made his heart stop. It was the soft, hesitant melody of a Chopin nocturne. The lid of the pianoforte was open. The rebuilding was a quiet, painstaking process. It was not a matter of grand gestures, but of small, sustained acts of attention. It was a period of learning. Alistair started coming to her study in the mornings. He did not come to oversee or approve. He came with questions. He brought her the quarterly reports from the northern estates, and he listened as she pointed out inefficiencies he had overlooked for a decade. Her mind was like a finely honed instrument, cutting through layers of tradition and mismanagement to find the logical, elegant solution. He found himself looking forward to these sessions. He learned the language of her thoughts, the quick turns of her logic, the dry wit that surfaced in her marginalia. He was not just consulting a partner, he was learning from a master. He started bringing her things, not jewelry or gowns, but items he knew she would value. A rare first edition of a philosophical text he found in a dusty London bookshop, a set of German astronomical charts he had commissioned, a portfolio of architectural drawings for a new library wing he proposed to build, asking for her design input. Each gift was a message, I see you. I know what you love. In return, she began, slowly, to let him in. The door that had been shut so firmly began to creak open. Their dinners were no longer sterile affairs. They debated politics. They discussed literature. They argued over the best way to improve crop yields. He found her mind to be a thrilling, challenging landscape. He discovered that her quietness had never been an absence of thought, but a surplus of it. She did not speak unless she had something of substance to say. The first salon she hosted was a revelation. The Blackwood House drawing room, once a place of stultifying formality, became the most sought-after intellectual hub in London. Ilara curated her guest list with precision, bringing together a radical poet, a pragmatic government minister, a controversial scientist, and a visiting artist. The result was an evening of explosive, brilliant conversation. Alistair watched her move through the room, not as a hostess, but as a conductor, guiding the symphony of ideas. She drew out the shy, challenged the bombastic, and connected disparate minds with a subtle, graceful touch. She was in her element. She was magnificent, and he felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost took his breath away. This was his wife. This was the woman he had almost erased. Their joint project became the undoing of Lord Ashworth. Alistair, using his ducal influence, began a quiet investigation into the man's finances. But it was Ilara who found the key. Poring over public records of stock transactions and shipping manifests, she uncovered a complex web of fraud and insider dealing. She laid it all out for Alistair on the library table one night, a clear and undeniable map of Ashworth's corruption. He has been using his government connections to manipulate the price of grain imports, she explained, her finger tracing a line on a chart. He creates artificial shortages, drives up the price, and then sells his own holdings. It's why the bread prices in the city have been so high. Alistair looked from the papers to her face, illuminated by the lamplight. They were a team. Her mind and his power, woven together into something formidable. The anonymous information found its way to the right people in Parliament. Ashworth was ruined. His public disgrace, swift and total. They never spoke of their role in it, but it was a silent, solidifying victory that bound them closer than any vow. One evening, weeks later, they were sitting in the library, the comfortable silence of true companionship between them. The fire crackled in the hearth, the room filled with the scent of old books and beeswax. Alistair looked at her, at the way the firelight caught the intelligent curve of her brow as she read. The contract, the bargain, the long months of coldness, it all felt like a lifetime ago. A story about two other people. He had told her he was wrong. He had shown her he had changed. But there was one thing left to say. The most important thing of all. Ilara, he said softly. She looked up, her finger marking her place in her book. He did not have the words of a poet. He only had the plain, unvarnished truth. My life began the day I realized how wrong I was about you. Everything before that was a prologue. I was a fool who thought he needed a quiet Duchess, when what I truly needed was you. He went to her, kneeling by her chair and taking her hand. Her fingers were warm in his. I did not honor our first contract, so let us make a new one. A better one. He looked into her clear gray eyes, the eyes he had once found unremarkable and now found to be the most beautiful in the world. I love you, he said, not your title, not your function. You, your mind, your strength, your silence, and your voice, all of it. I love you. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow or resignation. It was a tear of release. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his skin. I know, Alistair, she whispered. I am beginning to believe you. A year later, The world of the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood was irrevocably changed. Blackwood Manor was no longer a silent, grand mausoleum. It was alive with debate, music, and laughter. The library had a new, magnificent wing, designed by the Duchess and frequented by both of them. The salons, hosted by Alara, were legendary. To receive an invitation was to be acknowledged as someone of consequence, not of birth, but of mind. She had reshaped the social landscape of her corner of the world, replacing pomp with substance. Alistair was a different man. The ducal arrogance had been replaced by a quiet confidence, the cold detachment by a warm attentiveness, especially where his wife was concerned. He was still a powerful man, but his power was now tempered by her wisdom. They were a formidable partnership, their strengths intertwined. He governed his vast domains, and she governed his heart, and together they governed their world. One crisp autumn afternoon, he found her on the east terrace, overlooking the gardens. She was wrapped in a thick shawl, her gaze on the distant hills. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. She was several months along with their first child. The heir he had once thought of as a mere clause in a contract was now a source of profound and quiet joy, a symbol of a love he had almost been too blind to find. "What are you thinking about?" "Ho," he murmured into her hair. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that still made his heart ache with the memory of its long absence. "I was thinking about the French ambassador," she said, "and how dreadfully bored he would be if he were here right now." Alistair laughed, a deep, happy sound. He tightened his embrace, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. In his study, locked away in his desk drawer, was an old, folded letter. He kept it as a reminder of his own breathtaking foolishness and of the incredible grace of the woman who had taught him, finally, how to see. He had set out to acquire a duchess and had, by some miracle he would never fully comprehend, found a universe instead. Tell me in the comments, if you had been Alara, what one condition would you have added to her new terms for their marriage? I am always so curious to know what you would do. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for being here. Your time and attention are the greatest compliments you can give. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more stories just like this one. What happens when a man who values only duty marries a woman who values only freedom? Our next story features a reclusive Scottish earl, a defiant London heiress, and a marriage contract with a clause no one expected. They arrive here, lost and ready for a new story, whenever they are ready.